With real estate volumes plummeting in both Canada and the US, we've basically seen realtor commissions cut in half this year. And so a lot of them are, of course, going to go bankrupt. And that's just the way these cycles go, unfortunately. And I can already hear you guys in the comments screaming out, no, not the realtors, please, not anybody but the realtors. Look, I realize the profession is looked at with a high level of contempt, and I don't necessarily think all of it's misplaced. We're going to talk about that in this video, but first let's get into the numbers. All right, so let's start off with volume. You can see here we're running about 59,000 units, which is roughly half the 10-year average. Okay, it's the lowest level in 10 years, except for that little blip during the start of COVID when everyone sort of froze up and didn't know what was going on. Then, of course, rates got cut and volume skyrocketed. So 50% of the 10-year average, but like 35, 40% of sort of the COVID boom era when a lot of new realtors thought, hey man, this is great. This is looking good. And when you zoom into October, the picture gets a little bit uglier as well. So if you look at October, 4,646 home sales in the Toronto area, which is the lowest October going back to 1996. So it's a brutal time to be a seller, and it's a very brutal time to be a realtor as well. Now, obviously, this drop in volume can be attributed to the rapid rate hiking cycle we just went through and the shock to the market and sentiment that it caused. So you can see here in this chart from Urban Nation, the light blue line is the interest rates, and the dark blue line is the volume of MLS transactions that happens. Of course, transaction volume fell accordingly, and that's because the Toronto market, let's be honest, is a highly levered marketplace, right? Now, it is worth noting that I believe the number 48. So 48% of Toronto homeowners don't actually hold any mortgage. But of course, for first-time home buyers or upsizers, they, of course, in general, are taking out really large mortgages. So that's going to have an effect on that segment in particular, which is where a lot of the activity actually happens. Now let's talk about dirty, overpaid real estate agents. So if we look at 2021, and 2021 was like a hallmark year, right? Great year to be a realtor. Literally, you could throw a couple business cards off the balcony, probably pick up a buyer or two. So if you look at 2021 and you look at the deal volume by agent, something really interesting happens. The Pareto principle applies. Of course it does. So 20% of agents do 80% of the business. It's probably even more skewed than that, but let's just look at the data here. So 79% of realtors did less than 5 transactions, which means they did not earn a living wage after expenses, right? You got to be in the 6 plus. You have to be, or you're just not going to do very well. Marketing costs and brokerage splits can be very high, particularly if you're at a full service brokerage, right? So really you have to be in the 6 plus just to afford life. I mean, realistically, you want to be 10 plus or you're going to really struggle out there. So the reality is, if you look at the 2 deals and under, a lot of these people are going to be part-timers. So we don't really even want to talk about them because these are just people who, buy or sell deals for themselves or the occasional family and friend. So again, in a great year like 2021, really you can say that 10% of agents were doing okay for themselves and 3% of agents were doing very well for themselves. And of course, you've got 0.4% of agents taking home, probably close to $1 million a year or more in that 50 to 100 plus transaction category, which aligns pretty well with the income distribution in Toronto in terms of the top 1% earners, right? But take all of these numbers and cut them in half. And that's where we're at today. So a lot of these people who were kind of scraping by with 6 to 10 deals, they've now fallen into the category where they probably can't make their payments on things, right? They've got that new Mercedes CLA and pearl white or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be a hard year, a hard couple of years to survive if these realtors weren't planning and putting money away for this market. So a couple of weeks ago, I posted a short form video talking about real estate commissions basically being cut in half this year. And it went a little bit viral on Instagram and TikTok, and somebody reposted it to the Toronto real estate Reddit. And I read through the comments and they were like nothing I've ever read. Like, look, I know people don't like realtors. I think that's fairly obvious because when people who don't know me ask what I do for a living, I do everything in my power to avoid saying realtor. And the reality is I do have a license. Now, the last time I've actually shown a property in person was 4+ years ago. But I do still hold that license and I don't want to lose it. And there are rules and regulations about disparaging other realtors. So I'm going to tread lightly and I'll leave it to you guys to talk about everything you hate about realtors in the comments below. Now, look, I know our industry is not very well liked. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that. I don't think it's entirely fee-based, right? I don't think it's entirely fee-based. A lot of people complain about how much money realtors make, but the reality is nobody's holding a gun to your head. There's thousands, tens of thousands of discount brokers in the GTA who will list your home or represent you as a buyer for 1% or less. And of course, there are tons of services for FSBOs, for sale by homeowners, right? So you can pay $499, get your listing pushed on MLS, and you could just hire a photographer, a videographer, stager if you wanted, and you can have your listing, your home, sold by yourself and marketed every bit as professionally as if a realtor did it. So you have optionality when it comes to fees. You don't have to include a realtor, or you could. I think a big part of the problem though is the opaqueness and just, the lack of transparency in general. So I don't know if you remember, but in 2011, the Competition Bureau sued Treb over MLS access. So prior to that, you had to go through a realtor to get access to listings, or you had to go through one of the approved portals. Now, of course, you have all these third-party apps like House Sigma, Condos.ca, the list goes on and on and on, that allows that data to be propagated to the public without you having to go through an agent. Of course, that is a good thing, but then you fast forward a couple of years and you have that whole debate about sold data, right? So a lot of realtors wanted to hold back the sold data from the public. Of course, it's in the consumer's best interest to have access to all of the sold data for homes in their region. Like, I don't know how that's even an argument, but sure enough, you had a lot of realtors who said, hey, look, like, we shouldn't be providing this sold data. Only a realtor is qualified to interpret that data with all of their 6 months of illustrious education. And I remember distinctly thinking at this time, like, if your primary value proposition to a home seller is, I have the data and you don't, so I can price accordingly, I mean, you must be a pretty crappy realtor. So again, we're seeing moves in the right direction there, but it just seems everything in real estate, in the real estate industry, just moves so slowly in Ontario. And now we get to this, closed bidding. Now, closed bidding is a hot debate amongst realtors. I've always thought it was crazy that the bids you make on the largest financial purchase of your life, if you're in a competing multiple offer scenario, would be entirely blind. I mean, it very clearly only serves to protect the interests of the seller and is entirely at the detriment of the buyer. But a lot of agents will actually argue with me on that. Surely enough, most of them are listing predominantly agents rather than buying agents. But regardless, one of the arguments that they will make is basically, look, when you get 10 offers on offer night, 7 of them won't be based in reality. They'll be close to your list price, which isn't what you actually want. Your market value is, say, it's 700. You're listed at 600. You'll have 3 offers that are within a 30K spread around that $700,000 market value. And I've always thought that's an interesting argument, because it's like, well, what about the minority of times where the bid spread is wide, where, you've got someone who comes in at 800 because they've just lost 5 bids over the last 5 weeks, and maybe they're moving out of their rental soon, so they have a close deadline, and perhaps also they have bad information or a weird comparable provided to them by their agent, and so they think 800 is justified. Well, now that person just paid 100K more than the thing's worth, but it sets the new comparable for the neighborhood. So the next home seller is going to be expecting that on offer night, and buyers are going to be using that to justify their price, all based on one buyer out of 10 potential bids on that home. I've always just thought it was a little strange. And of course, we get this, where now we can open up bidding, but only if a seller agrees to it. And if you're a seller and you're trying to get maximum value on your home in a seller's market, you simply wouldn't do open bidding. I mean, why would you? You're more likely to get a higher price on blind bidding. So again, I think this is just kind of lip service, but I guess in a way, optionality, I mean, it's a move in the right direction. Of course, in the States, we just had that big lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors. And so the Canadian Real Estate Association must be shaking in their boots right now. And realtors have decided to defend themselves on Facebook. So I don't know if you guys have seen this, but a lot of my colleagues in the real estate industry are reposting this. And no hate against, if you guys are watching, my friends who are posting this, I just think it's really cute. It reminds me a lot of forwarding email chains. And it's like, so there's a lot of talk about real estate agent commissions. They love what they do, and they do it because they love helping people. It's kind of like every realtor posts like their origin story in their bio on their website or on TikTok or whatever. And it's always like, I decided to get into real estate because I love real estate. And it's like you and everybody else. HGTV and Selling Sunset are some of the most popular, shows for a reason. It's like asking a 25-year-old F1 driver why he got into, racing, and he goes, I like cars. It's like, yeah, you and every man your age. So anyways, they go down this list to talk about what's so hard about our job. And you just know someone at OpenAI is just like parsing this data and like, oh, the realtors just gave us a template. Let's automate this. We're starting to see the number of realtors in the US regress. I doubt you'll see the same thing in Toronto, just because it's fairly cheap. It's fairly affordable to park your license if you're not going to transact anymore. So you probably won't see that, but you will see a lot of realtors heading back to their day job. I mean, you're already seeing it. I'm hearing about it from friends and friends of friends. Lots of people going back to their day jobs already, or at least trying to. And that whole blind bidding thing opens up another discussion entirely, where it seems that the real estate industry as a whole in Ontario always seems to protect sellers and current homeowners over new market participants, i.e. first-time home buyers, right? So if you look at the total government share of a new home purchase, meaning, on a brand new condo, what is the cost of that condo? Developers make a 15 to 20% profit margin inflation, while the government these days is pushing 31%, right? So you have development charges, education levies, HST, the list goes on and on. New housing is the most taxed industry in Ontario for the past 5 years, and it's not even close. Now, because of the title of this video and the type of comments I get on these videos all the time, I'm going to preempt the most common comments I always get on every video, no matter what it's about. We don't need realtors. Correct. Bingo. You are right. You don't. You can pay $4.99 and list on MLS without us. I know a lot of people who have sold their homes and condos without realtors. I don't even know why. I agree with you. You don't. You can hire a great videographer, great photographer, great stager if you need it. Yeah, yes, correct. You don't need realtors. Realtors will be replaced by AI. Bingo. Yes, also right. The data I showed you on the deal distribution of agents in Toronto for 2021 does not include pre-construction sales. Pre-construction isn't really tracked anywhere other than self-reported numbers that go through Altus and Urban Nation. So how is the pre-construction market looking? Well, not good. So if you look at the top 10 project launches for the third quarter of this year, you'll see that there's really only one that achieved a sellout. So you've got Pickering City Center. Props to Center Court. Don't know how you guys continue to do it. It's impressive. 95% sold, right? You've got Park Road coming in number 2 at 55% sold. And you can see some of the atrocious sales numbers here. It's 20% sold, 12% sold, 36, 5, and 7. Now, this is interesting, right? Because you cannot break ground until you hit 70% sold unless you are a developer who can afford to self-finance the construction. Very few developers in Toronto are in that category. So the reality is there's only one project on this list that is even in a position to break ground. So this spells obviously disaster for long-term housing affordability because we're going to start to see a contraction in the number of housing starts. Actually, we are seeing it now. So if you look at the construction starts for the third quarter of this year, we're at just shy of 1,800. Again, the lowest number of condo starts in a decade at a time when, of course, we are running at the highest level of immigration in a decade. So you can see how over a longer period of time, this does not work out well in the favor of anybody who doesn't already own property in the GTA. This slowdown in construction and in real estate in general will, of course, be a major drag on the Canadian economy, more so than in the US because of how dependent we are on real estate as an industry. Unfortunately, we're in a position where real estate and rental and leasing, 13% of our GDP, and construction, an additional 7%. And of course, with that lowered sales volume comes some other risks. So you have all of these units that are under construction already that may actually end up canceling because of the fact that we're seeing developers go bankrupt left, right, and center. So over the next 12 months, you're going to continue to see, especially smaller developers land in receivership, smaller sites land in receivership. And so again, just more contraction of housing supply on the current market. You know, what's funny is every time I talk about developers going bankrupt, my comments get flooded by people who are like, good, love to see it, screw the developers, etc. A lot of times the people commenting that are the same ones complaining about housing affordability. It's kind of like kicking your dog and then complaining about your vet bill. You know, in order to improve affordability over the long run, you need the supply to go up or the demand to go down. And obviously, how do you get supply to market? Well, a developer has to go out there and build it. You know, not every developer plays by the rules. You got some sketchy characters out there, and a market like this will almost certainly wash a lot of those characters out. But some smaller developers will just be caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that's really unfortunate because we need more of those participants to build the housing that this city so desperately needs. That's all I've got for this video, guys. I will see you next video.